Όσο πες ο βάκχος πολύσυφρον λιέος, όταν φρένασες άμας εσέλθει με διδότας. Διδάσκει με χορεύειν, διδάσκει με χορεύειν, διδάσκει με χορεύειν, διδάσκει με χορεύειν. Ότας μεθασέραστας μετακρότων μετόδας τερπίνε κι Αφροδίτα, και πάλι θέλω χορεύειν, και πάλι θέλω χορεύειν, και πάλι θέλω χορεύειν, και πάλι θέλω χορεύειν.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of It's Not What You Think. This is Rick.
This is Darren.
And today's episode is called Ancient Greek and Roman Instruments. And what we're going to do is we're going to do like an
examination of different instruments that were used at the time of, 500 BC to 1 AD?
I wouldn't even get caught up into the time period. Everything up to the new millennium.
Gotcha. So we're looking at Bronze Age instruments. We've come out of the Stone Age.
Sure.
We're into the Bronze Age.
But we're going to focus on Greek and Roman.
Right.
And so I think we'll be surprised. And I think you'll be surprised.
Yeah.
And I want to surprise you with the first instrument. It's called a hydraulis. Now the hydraulis, and it's not one of the ones I sent you to check out earlier, which is why I think I'm going to surprise you.
All right.
A hydraulis is an ancient organ. It's a keyboard instrument.
I imagine it has something to do with water?
Yes, correct. I think, and I don't know the whole engineering behind it, but I think water gets pumped through the bellows. So instead of air, it's water, and then the pressure of the water sends air through the pipes.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and so it's an ancient pipe organ.
Yeah.
And we have pictures of it, and we have some video. They reconstructed it.
Okay.
I don't think they found any working ones, but they found it in their artwork.
Okay.
And so we know that they used it because their artwork demonstrated them using it. We found it in their literature.
And was it a key instrument? They had keys?
Yeah, I'll show you.
Oh, so you know what's cool about that is that now we've been talking about like the evolution of music from the start.
Mm-hmm.
But what's cool about that is that now they're actually mapping out tones onto a keyboard.
Yeah.
And saying, okay, this is the basis for music theory.
Right.
Moving forward.
Because the piano is the basis for music theory.
Right, yeah. It's a map. It is a map of the notes, right, in a linear order.
Which I always thought was really interesting, and it makes sense being a musician, but I always thought it was interesting that composers, even if they don't play piano, they sit at the piano and compose.
Right.
Like I know one of my teachers played the English, the French horn.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the French horn, I don't know if it has any relationship to the piano,
Right.
but he always composed at the piano.
And probably just the easiest, because again, it's a map. It is literally like a button of samples, and you can say, oh, sample, oh, this sounds good, and then oh, this sounds good.
Yeah.
So what's cool about this is that what they've done is they've taken effectively a flute, a pipe, and turned it into a mapped system. Because I don't think they're getting any different quality of tone out of the hydraulis that they would out of them playing a pipe.
Right.
But I think what they found was that it's easier to play a key on a panel than it is to hold a pipe and play a pipe with notches.
And possibly the key, well, a pipe organ is called the father of all instruments.
This is it.
And I think primarily it's called that because it's like one of the only instruments you can press and hold and it sustains forever until you let go. Maybe not the father of instruments, maybe the king of instruments, I think it might be called. And so you're always getting the same pitch,
right,
with very little effort involved and very little skill. Right. And I'm not trying to minimize the value of it, but I'm trying to actually emphasize and demonstrate why I think you're correct, and how when I play a flute, I need skill and I need dedication and training, and I may not get the same notes, consistency of my breath.
Yep.
Where now, if I have a hydraulis, hey, guess what? We can do this, and now we're getting more consistent results.
Exactly. With consistent results with minimal effort.
Right.
And a more easy system to play, because you can organize your notes in a way that are linear.
Yeah.
So really cool. I think this. I think we've talked about this now and have tried to pinpoint like the exact point that Western. This is it. I think the invention of the hydraulis really is, because this is the foundational point at which we have a mapping of music theory.
You're right, and therefore it would probably be instrumental in teaching music to others.
Exactly.
Let's find out when it was. It was invented in the 3rd century.
So yeah, right around the time that we're.
So around. BC. Third century BC.
Right around the time we're talking here.
Right. So that's pretty awesome.
Well, it was invented by somebody from Alexandria. I wonder if it was invented in Alexandria.
Oh, I see that now.
Eusebius. That sounds Roman to me. Or at least Latin it. were talking about how the hydraulis is the predecessor of the pipe organ, because pipe organs when they started to become developed were so big that they had to build buildings around them. Basically.
Right.
Like a church.
Churches.
Right, was built around the pipes of the pipe organ that would ultimately be the centerpiece of this church, or the one in New York City at Macy's. Whereas this is, and we were talking about how
I need to cut you off. That
Yes.
one in New York, I just looked it up before you came here. It has 10,000 pipes.
Yep. And I think there's like 3 people, and the guy who plays it is a descendant of Bach.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but what I was saying, without the hydraulis, there would be no Bach. Bach composed on pipe organs.
Yeah.
He was the master of the pipe organ.
I mean, it's such a simple instrument, but it's ingenious.
Right.
It really is.
The mechanics of it are so, I mean, for this time, that they figured out that, the pressure of the water would force the air through the pipe, and all you had to do was press this little lever, and oh, look at that.
And release the air out into the pipe, and you get a single tone.
Right, and then, with the beauty of the hydraulis is that it's so small you can move it. Now, obviously, the setback of the hydraulis is you need 2 people pumping, because without it, it's done.
Yeah.
But the hydraulis, the concept is also an accordion. Force the air, right? So the hydraulis, I think, is the mother of modern music. Without the hydraulis, we don't have modern music.
Exactly.
And
like you said,
you did surprise me. You were looking for it. You did surprise me.
All right. And you mentioned that you can play more than one note.
Right.
Now that's a huge leap in our evolution of music.
Right.
Because initially you had percussion instruments, and then you had melody instruments, the flute, the bone flute, and you can only play single notes on those, which is why you get, in the Aulos, you have the double one, where they're playing double, so they could start to play more than one note, but they needed 2 instruments, theoretically.
Or you had an orchestra of people playing, which, I mean, I don't even know, they probably did at the time, but I would imagine they probably weren't sophisticated enough to compose the music for
No, I believe you're right.
And so the hydraulis, introducing that concept, now people are going, now we can start to compose.
Right, more than one note at the same time.
This is the coolest thing we've seen so far.
Yeah.
Without question, the coolest thing.
All right. We listened to several little pieces, and when I mean little, I mean short.
Yeah.
Several short pieces to highlight the hydraulis and what it can do and what it sounds like. It has a very mellow tone to it. When we're talking about pipe organs usually have a real brassy, in-your-face loudness.
Right.
And I don't necessarily mean volume. I just mean the timbre of it is really in your face. Pay attention to me. Where this is really mellow and whispery, and it may have to do with the size of the pipes, because the pipes are very small, and there's not a whole lot of them. The range is, I think, an octave, eight pipes, but it still has a breathiness and a mellowness to it that I think is really really nice to listen to.
Yeah, it is nice. I mean, if somebody were to tell me that the hydraulis was going to make a comeback, I would believe them.
Yeah.
Because it does sound nice.
Yeah.
And we can, we don't need 2 humans to pump anymore. We have pumps, so we could theoretically invent a hydraulis that is a full scale hydraulis. Although
88 keys, you mean?
Well, I don't think we'd be able to do that, because the low end you'd need a huge pipe.
Right.
Hence the pipe organ.
Yeah. It would be kind of interesting though, like how many you can get
on a mobile hydraulis with an electric pump.
Yeah.
That's our next project, is to create a new hydraulis. And the interesting thing too about the hydraulis is when I think of music of the time, this is what it sounds like.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you were to tell me to imagine the music, it's like this. It would be like this, sitting in a garden in Athens and hearing this type of music.
Yeah, I can picture that now that you mentioned it. Because at first I was like, really?
Yeah. Not that like nasty tone of the...
Yeah, well, that's true.
Because that is a disgusting sounding instrument. I want nothing... It sounds like a kazoo.
Right, it does.
You know?
Uh-huh. To me, it sounds very modern.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why at first I hesitated to agree with you.
Mm.
Because to me, it sounds more like early Middle Ages.
Mm. I see what you're saying.
Like the troubadours and the minstrels.
Like you would see coming to a medieval court.
Right, exactly. But now that you kind of fleshed it out in a different manner, yeah.
Although I would think that, like, I wouldn't imagine somebody playing hydraulis, because I didn't know it existed until 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
But I would imagine, 3 or 4 people playing pipes in similar construction and tone of what we get out of the hydraulis.
Mm-hmm.
But again, as we said, they probably didn't compose multi-instrument music for the time. It was probably mostly a single piece on a lyre or one pipe, one flute.
Because of the mosaics we have indication that they played, the hydraulis was sometimes accompanied by a horn.
Mm.
Like that video we just watched.
Right.
I wonder if it's in this. Yeah, right here.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I mean, so if this is Roman. I remember seeing this on the computer. I think this was like 3rd century.
Hmm.
So I mean, there's some indication that obviously they're playing with someone.
Yeah. Huh.
An accompaniment.
I wonder if the hydraulis was meant to be more environmental. Oh, look at that.
There's more, yeah.
Yeah, that's like 3. They got a whole horn section.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Isn't that wild?
That is wild. Now imagine having a composition of an orchestra of those instruments and then playing some kind of jazzy New Orleans music.
Right. That would be a mashup for sure, huh?
That's it. Bring the vibe of New Orleans to ancient Rome.
So the next instrument I wanted to present is called the Aeolian harp.
Mm.
And then we don't have like a date that they were created or invented,
Right.
but we know that the ancient Greeks used them, and the ancient Greeks constructed small versions of the Aeolian harp and put them in their windows, and it would create beautiful music. It's kind of like the ancient version of a wind chime.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
That they had the concept of like natural sound, right?
Letting the elements participate in creating sounds.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Like John Cage.
Like John Cage.
The original John Cage.
The original John
ancient
Cage.
Greeks.
That's funny. You're right. Here, I'll let you hear some of it. Okay, so we listened to a little bit of the wind harp. Obviously, it gets repetitive.
Yeah.
Because you're limited to its musical vocabulary.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's very soothing. That repetitiveness is very soothing.
Yeah. Well, and it's repetitive to an extent. I mean, obviously, it'll change as the wind changes,
Right.
which is neat. And I think to your point, it is very soothing. It's quite relaxing to listen to. It was sort of like a background. If it was a little low volume in the background of a spa,
Yeah.
I would imagine it was something like that.
Yeah. Or like you said, your garden, your
Right,
personal
or the
garden.
right.
I would, very similar to what you had said, I would certainly take one of these over wind chimes.
Yeah, wind chimes are too like
Clangy.
Yeah, exactly. It's too percussion-y.
Right.
This is much more melodic.
Yeah.
But the cool thing about the wind harp is that, and they say that there dates back to King David.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt it. And the only reason I doubt it is because there are harmonics at play that you have to be pretty precise on in terms of the length and the width of the chord. That I don't know that the ancient peoples of King David's time would have had the wherewithal to know. I mean, we discussed Pythagoras.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Pythagoras rediscovered something that even older people knew could be.
Right.
But I doubt it. Based on our current knowledge, I would stand to reason that this is a product of harmonics.
That makes sense. We were able to find some websites, and there are some people who are making them and selling them.
Yes.
And so you may not get it off Amazon, but you are able to find some, and you can get your own wind harp and put it in your backyard, and you can hear this.
I would say it's a better gift than wind chimes. If you're thinking about getting your grandmother wind chimes, spend the extra money and get a wind harp.
Definitely. Okay, we're continuing to explore string instruments,
Yes.
and we came across one called a lyre, one called a pharynx, one called a guitarra, and then the harp or the angle harp.
Right.
And the sambuca
Mm-hmm.
or sambuca. I'm not really sure.
Your guess is as good as mine. I mean,
Right.
as far as I know, sambuca is a delicious liqueur.
Yeah, I know. So I'm not sure if they went with that.
It could be made. I think sambuca is made from something particular.
Licorice.
Yeah,
Right?
Might be.
Anise.
could be. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Mm-hmm. And very subtle differences.
Yes.
And so we discovered. Let's share what we discovered. The
Yeah.
differences
So we
are.
were trying to figure out the difference between these three instruments, and it seems like what the strings are resonating against is the key difference. A lyre tends to have a turtle shell, so it's a more of an open-bodied, separate portion that's attached to the instrument. A guitarra will be more like your typical guitar, probably the predecessor of the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
A hollow body that the strings are resonating in.
Well, certainly
then-
the word guitar comes from guitar.
Guitar, right, yes. And then the pharynx seems to be more like your traditional harp. It's similar to the angle harp where you
Mhm.
kind of play it on your lap. There's no, the strings are just resonating in air. There's nothing for them to reverberate. So I think that's the difference.
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong, but according to those pictures that we
Yeah.
looked at, it looks correct.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And I think it's interesting that so far in history now, we're getting plucked stringed instruments. We haven't encountered the bowed instrument at this point, the bowed string instruments.
yeah, but that's probably next. You know, you figure if
Right.
they've just discovered harmonics.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so now they're like, oh, this length of this thickness chord creates this sound.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's put those onto a thing and pluck them.
Right,
Oh,
right,
here's some
yeah.
beautiful music. We
Mhm.
just wait for somebody to go rub something against it and
Right,
go,
right.
ooh, that's different. Now
Mhm.
now then you invent something else.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything more you want to add to the stringed instruments?
The only thing that I would say about the stringed instruments is that they're like, I feel like we've started over with instrumentation. You know what I mean? We got to a point in the Stone Age where we had progressed so far. Now we're at this point where new things are emerging, and so the lyre, I'm not as impressed with the lyre and the guitarra as I was with the hydraulis. It's
yeah.
you know, the sound and
Well, the lyre,
quality.
even though we're focusing on ancient Greek instruments and we're calling the lyre a Greek instrument, remember it goes back to 1400 to the
True. To the
Sumerians.
In the Sumerians, they had the lyre as well.
and I think that's when it was first developed around then, and so they were getting not only melody but also some primitive harmony, because you can play more than one string at the same time, and so the evolution of that, it's not as interesting as, like you said, the hydraulis.
Right, and it feels to me, and this is again probably incorrect, and we'll find out later. It feels to me that the stringed instruments are on their way out at this point. The plucking instruments to be replaced by things like the hydraulis,
or bowed string,
or a bowed instrument. Right, exactly. Because I think at this point in time, the lyre had run its course. It's almost like you've got thousands of years of lyre music, and people are just, well, I want to hear something new. So enter the flutes, enter the hydraulis, and now the lyre is taking a back seat until somebody someday rubs a bow against the string.
Well, speaking of enter the flutes, when it comes to ancient Greek instruments, they have the aulos.
Yes.
And like I was saying earlier, the aulos is a flute, a variation of a flute, and you can only get one note on a flute, but what they did was they had two of them, and they would play both of them simultaneously, so you can get more than one note coming out. And what's interesting is they would have two different flutes. Like, there would be a partial scale on one flute and a partial scale on the second flute, and they can go back and forth between the flutes and create melodies, or they can play both of them simultaneously and create harmonies. And so that was a pretty unique instrument. I don't think we even have anything like that today.
Well, we have the kazoo.
We have the kazoo.
Now, the cool thing...
Imagine someone playing two kazoos.
Well, that's what the aulos reminds me of. I just imagine the Benny Hill theme song played on an aulos would be hilarious.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's not a very pleasant sounding instrument at all.
This. So that's an example of the aulos, an ancient wind instrument, very similar to a recorder, although it has a reed tip.
Yeah.
And so, unlike the recorder, which is just pure air blown from your lips, This, you're squeezing air through a reed and you're vibrating the reed.
Oh, and that's probably where that
That
raspiness might be coming
buzziness
from.
starts to sound. Yeah.
But I do stand corrected. It's not always sound like a kazoo. It's you can get some really nice melodies out of it.
And like you said, that one started to sound like clarinet.
Yeah, like a primitive clarinet.
Right. I think my hypothesis is that the tone color comes from the amount of pressure that's being forced into the instrument.
Yeah.
And when you're really giving a high amount of pressure, you're really putting a lot of stress on the instrument and the reeds, and you're getting a really heightened buzzing sound that does come across sounding like a kazoo.
Yeah. And I think you're right about that.
But when you're bringing it down and making it more personal, and you're not trying to compete with other instruments, then you get a nice cleaner sound. It does sound like maybe an oboe or a clarinet.
But the cool thing though is that it does introduce dynamics, because if you're if you have a mono timbric, I guess would be,
which with the string instruments, the lyres
exactly, you can't really get too much dynamic out of it. Whereas with this, when you're if you imagine a song like a story, when you've reached the climax and you're really putting force into it, and you want to, you can demonstrate dynamics on this instrument.
And I think that's a really good point, and one of the major differences between selecting a string instrument versus selecting the reed instrument is that the reed instrument does offer the option and qualities of dynamic where the string instruments don't.
And even the hydraulics, you can punch those keys down as hard as you want. It will not change the dynamic of that instrument. So that is, I mean, it's so interesting that we're at this point and already we've gotten to. I mean, I think all the foundations of music theory have been introduced by this point.
Right.
So
it's the launch pad.
Yeah. We've got the key mapping of all the different notes on the hydraulis. We've got different quality instruments between the reeds and the string, and they're looking at different reverberation material, whether it's a turtle shell or different types of wood. We've got horns that are being introduced. So we were joking earlier about the Roman horn. This is big wraps around the person. It must be really
Yeah.
really hard to hold, but that's because it wasn't until God knows when that they decided to wrap that metal up into what became essentially a primitive bugle.
And also then from there they went to valves.
Right.
And the valves actually adjust. Well, you know what? Before it moved from bugle to valve, there was a intermediate one where you would pull off piping and insert piping, and
like
so you can you can change the length of it by inserting different piping, and that was one way they could change the pitch. And then they moved into valves, and the valves actually create different lengths. By cutting off and introducing different air lengths.
And then with things like the Aulos, we're seeing dynamics. Mm-hmm. So you can play really soft, you can play really loud, and the quality of the sound that you're getting changes depending on the magnitude of how you're playing. And so at this point, I genuinely feel like we've got the foundation of everything that there is to harmonics, right? We've got everything that we need to go forth and make what we now know as music.
Now you mentioned horns, and horns introduces an aspect of metal that the previous ones don't.
Right.
Like the Hydraulis doesn't, and the Aulos doesn't, and the guitar and the lyres don't. So now we're going to enter the sound of metal with the trumpets.
Yes, right.
So let's listen to that.
Okay. Perfect segue.
Thanks. we listened to a couple of tracks that featured horns. They're probably made out of brass. They definitely have that trumpet-like quality that can only come from a metal-sounding instrument.
Yep. It was nice, I guess. I mean, it was basic.
Very indicative of what a trumpet would sound like.
Yeah.
The modern trumpet.
And really, I mean, it does sound like modern horns.
Right.
It goes to show not much has changed since they figured out that they can make instruments out of metal.
I applaud you. You're about to enter Rome as a blood-stained conqueror, and yet you look as calm as a cup of water.
I'm glad I appear, son.
Bacchus! Something more cheerful.
And I think you're right. I think that we have definitely, in this time period, laying the foundations for all of Western music to come.
Yep. And I mean, from the instruments to the theory to, you know, putting poems to music.
Right.
So the basis of vocals.
Songs.
Right. This is it. I mean, this is the point, and it's ironic that it all culminates right around 0.
Yeah. It is interesting and ironic that you say that.
So, I mean, maybe BC we need to find a new translation for that, from before Christ to before modern music.
Right.
Because that seems to be the tipping point.
Well, they actually did change it.
Yeah.
BCE, before the Common Era.
Before the Common Era, yeah. No,
but I don't think that's as descriptive as what you're going for.
No, but it does seem. I mean, the Common Era. You wouldn't say before the Common Era includes modern music.
Right.
Sure, I guess that's fine.
Before the musical era.
Yeah, something like that. but you know, the cool thing about the where we are is that there's a lot of experimentation going on with music, both from the perspective of creating new instruments, the perspective of like blowing air through a pipe, right? Oh, we have lungs, we can blow air. Oh, or we have wind, we can run wind through a wind harp.
Well, it's almost like an imitation of a person playing the flute.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like the airplane is an imitation of a bird flying. We're using the same aerodynamics and the same knowledge. And so here we have a flute player, someone blowing air through a flute that is made out of bone, and someone says we can imitate that. We'll create a hydraulis. We'll push air through a pipe. And now we're creating instruments that are mimicking the human being playing instruments.
And it's really, I mean, like at this point, there are so many things being experimented. Like, we've got this. We figured out how to make bronze. Let's make a horn. Right. Well, at what point was somebody like, I can make this instrument? Like, we've ram's horns, right? Ram's horns. Let's make something that's like a ram's horn, but not a ram's horn.
Yeah, again, imitating and I don't want to say perfecting, but adjusting.
Right.
And then in those adjustments, we're creating something new.
Right.
unless you have more to
The only
embellish
thing,
on.
no, that about wraps up my thought. The only thing that I had thought just at the end there was the only instrument that has not seen any type of evolution yet has been the drums.
Right.
They're
The percussion.
it's the same, right? They haven't introduced like a snare, putting snares underneath yet. So that'll be interesting to see what happens to music when we start trying to change the rhythmic instruments. Percussion.
We do have tuned percussion in the ancient world. So there is the evolution of just percussion instrument to tuned percussion instruments.
Now that is interesting because you can the smaller the drum, the lighter the sound.
Right.
So that's probably something that developed around the time of Pythagoras.
But you're right, we haven't developed a snare drum at this point yet, or
No.
altering the timbre of the percussion instruments,
Right.
and therefore altering their function within the context of a piece. It's primarily pulsing that they're going for.
Yes, right.
What I wanted to change gears just a little bit and introduce to you how the ancient Greek melodies have been influenced to today.
Okay.
And so we have some creative instrumentation where they've taken the Greek instruments and melodies and brought them to the concert hall.
Okay, that'll be cool.
Okay, we just heard two pieces that brings the ancient Greek lyre into the presence of modern day musical instruments.
Yeah.
And so we have brand new modern compositions. One we heard a string quartet style,
right.
where we had the cello, the viola, and the violin, and you remember they were playing pizzicato, plucking,
Right.
which made for the Greek lyre just come right in and fit
Right,
in with
right.
the group. But as you were saying, in comparison to the bowed instruments,
Yeah, it just doesn't have a voice of its own to stand against the
Right.
violin or any of them really. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
once they started playing with the bow, all of your attention is drawn to that instrument.
yeah,
And so the harp, it just becomes a background instrument in the same way that you would be, plucking on a violin or viola. So.
right. And largely that's because of the nature of the Greek lyre. The sound just goes away really fast. It's just a clunk, and it's gone. You know?
Right.
And the mandolin is very similar, and they developed the tremolo style, where they're doing this to create that sustaining of the notes.
Right.
But here, you're just getting that.
Even with the concerto, he had to play really quickly in order to get that type of sustain.
Right.
And that is unsustainable.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, it's nice. It's a fun experiment to see an ancient instrument be utilized in a modern orchestra.
Right.
I just don't think it works all that well.
We won't see any revolution of the
No,
lyre.
the
coming
harp
back.
killed the lyre. I
Yeah,
think.
you're probably right. Now here's another piece I want you to check out. It's a modern day orchestra playing an ancient Greek melody.
Oh,
The
okay.
first ode to Pindar.
Okay, very
Or,
cool.
Not to Pindar, but by Pindar. So,
think so.
we just listened to the first Pythian Ode, which was transcribed and presented in an orchestral arrangement. And true to the Greek style of music, there was a limited range of the melody.
Right.
It didn't take up more than an octave, which is what the lyres did.
Right.
They were just about an octave long. And the length of the piece was about a minute and 40 seconds,
Yeah.
which even the longest piece that we have, the Epitaph of Sikilos, which is the most complete music from ancient Greece, that's only about 2.5 minutes long.
Right, right.
So here I think we have a nice rendition of the ode, the Pythian Ode of Pindar in an orchestral variation.
Yeah.
And it's nice, and it also has a nice quietness to it, and I really like it.
I do too, and I think also that this is the original Pythian Ode by Pindar because they don't use the full orchestra.
You're right. It's
I-
not like blaring,
right, and I don't think
Beethoven or
they could. Yeah,
Mozart.
I don't think they could. They
Yeah.
probably tried, and as the transcription probably only got them so far.
Yeah.
But it's cool to hear the Greek mode
Yeah,
in modern context.
I agree.
And I think my recollection is it was an oboe that was really leading,
Right.
which the oboe kind of sounds a lot
That
like the
Olos.
yeah.
Yeah.
the Olos.
This is like one of my favorite, just short little pieces. I really like this one.
Yeah, it was nice. And then the other one that we listened to.
So in this particular piece, what brings to my attention is, unlike other ancient Greek reconstructions, where they try and actually bring the reconstruction to their appearance and wear togas and laurel wreaths and dance around like they probably did in ancient Greece. Here we have more of a modern performance where you're wearing tuxedos and you're in a concert hall and there is a conductor and you're performing an elegant, sophisticated audience, and so it comes across as more of a highbrow moment.
Yeah, and it's cool to see, like, again, a modern take on the ancient. Even though they're using ancient instruments, I think they're singing and playing.
I think he uses a guitar.
Right. What stood out to me immediately, and it wasn't something that I even thought about the last time we were approaching Greek music, was it doesn't seem like they have movements. It seems like it begins and that's it. It's there for the length of time that it was written for, and that's the extent of the song.
Now, just to clarify, when you say a movement, it's not like an ABA type of a pattern.
It seems like there's no introduction. There's no
chorus.
middle. Right. There's no end. It's you start where you start.
Right.
And it starts right into the song. And even in the video, when you see the guy, the conductor who's playing the drums, looks at everybody, counts them all in, and they all start at the same time.
Right. Which is indicative of the Iliad. The Iliad starts right in the middle of the battle.
Right.
We piece together the story that Menelaus was doing this, and it was like in flashbacks and stuff, but it starts right in the center of the piece.
Right.
And so it's kind of like what this is.
Yeah.
It starts right in the center.
And it's worth probably going back, and the audience feel free to go back and watch our previous episodes to see if this is true, but it's worth reassessing to see if other Greek pieces do the
Do that
same,
as
that
well.
they just start
Right.
and there's no movement.
Mhm.
And I think that is true.
We'll have to go back and watch.
Yeah.
I have the same feedback as you had offered in the previous piece, where in this piece, what they're doing is it's a modern composition that was composed within the last 100 years, and it bases its context on Greek modes, Greek a scale.
Right.
I know there's musicologists out there yelling at me. They're not called scales. No, they're called modes. But for ease of clarification, it's just a scale, a series of organized pitches. And they're borrowed from the ancient Greek style. Yet here we have pizzicato strings backing up the one bowed stringer, and that's the one you really pay attention to.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like you had pointed out to the previous video we saw, where they were doing exactly that.
Right. And the thing that stood out to me with this piece is that it is instantly recognizable as Greek. Now, having listened to the Greek,
your ear is very familiar and cognizant of the Greek style.
Yeah, just like, and it's really the scales that they're using. You know, it's not traditional. It has that feel. It's kind of repetitive in that way, and it's very short.
Which is interesting that ancient music is instantly recognizable. Like, if I were to even just hum to you, na 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 na, right? All of a sudden Egypt jumps into your mind, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And the same thing happens with this. Greek just jumps into your brain. And we can do the same thing for Middle Eastern, and like the Byzantine Empire has that.
Yeah, no, it's true. And so even though this composer was trying to use modern instrumentation, it still is so obviously ancient.
Yeah, I agree.
But it was cool. It's cool to hear that, you know, what Greek music could have become if they continued down what they were doing.
Okay, so now we're really exploring the influence that ancient Greek music has on today.
Yeah.
And now we just listened to and or watched the Star Wars theme on ancient Greek musical instruments.
Yes.
Which is a perfect ending to today's episode.
Yeah, and the inverse of the video that we just watched.
Right.
It was this is now modern music played
Right.
with Greek instruments as opposed to Greek music played with
modern instruments. Yeah, you got a nice
and
yin and yang going on.
Yeah, and it's nice. It sounds nice, but it's very.
I hate it.
It's very novelty. Yeah, it feels very novelty.
I hate it. It's cheese to the nth degree.
It is. It is. But it does. I will say. For all of the hate that I've given the lyre in the previous examinations, I think that this piece demonstrates the lyre can be a really nice and soothing instrument, despite the cheesiness of them playing Star Wars.
Yeah,
it sounds very nice, and if they were doing anything else,
it was very clean.
Yeah,
I'll give it to you.
Now I wonder. So Star Wars is modern music theory. Mm-hmm. I wonder if you were to take another song written with modern music theory and adapt it to ancient Greek instruments, if it would sound better or
as
worse.
crisp and clean.
Right.
I think it would be similar.
Mm-hmm. This piece, that is the Star Wars theme, is meant to be big.
Right.
And there's meant to be an orchestra and loud and in your face. And hearing it like toned down into a lyre that's really no sustain, and you have this minor little drum in the background. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel as big. It doesn't have the energy that it needs to have.
I think you're right. Whenever you have a modern piece that's written for the orchestra, you're really having a power behind it, and there's nothing that can substitute live orchestral music.
Right.
And so this is kind of like dumbing it down, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine Beethoven played on, a lyre. You're kind of like, thanks for giving us that, but it's not Beethoven.
Right. And even on to that point, I'm sure you've seen some of the more fantastic guitarists who can play the Fur-Elise on a guitar.
Yeah.
It sounds really cool, and it's a really excellent performance. It won't beat it on a piano.
Or even Flight of the Bumblebee.
Exactly.
They do that to impress you with their technique and skill, which is you walk away saying, wow, I'm impressed with your technique and skill, but you're not thinking, gee, I want to hear that again.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, all in all, I think that that piece, the value of the Star Wars piece, really, to me, is that it demonstrated the versatility of all of the ancient Greek instruments, and they're not just old, boring. You can do some pretty cool things. I don't think Star Wars is the right thing for it.
Right. But it was a nice arrangement.
Yeah.
Because there were, like you pointed out to me, there were several different. There was a guitar and a lyre, and they had a nice range of the musical Greek instruments present.
Yeah, if you were to put together a similar orchestra of Greek instruments, you can write a pretty nice piece, but it's not going to have the energy that an orchestral piece will.
So, did we come to the conclusion that the ancient Greek musical instruments need to stay with the ancient Greeks?
Yeah. I think that the kitara is probably the only one that really has any modern value.
Or the hydraulis.
Right. Or the hydraulis. But
so there's exceptions.
The lyre can stay. I mean, there might be some.
And the olos, you hate the olos.
Yeah, there might be some bluegrass band out there that wants to have a lyre, but go for it, but I don't think it can stay in the ancient era.
And the classic question that ends our episode: would you recommend any of this to a friend?
The hydraulis. I am going to take from this episode
Uh-huh.
to show people that the hydraulis was a thing.
And you're going to buy your grandparents.
Oh, the wind harp.
Alien
Yes,
harp.
yes. And the wind harp was very nice.
All right, so then yes.
There's no, I wouldn't say that there's a particular piece of music that we've heard today that
Right.
I'd say go listen.
Yeah.
But I would definitely say, hey, you have to see this.
Mhm.
The Romans really invented modern music
Right.
by the invention of the hydraulis.
I
Like I
think
said
so.
earlier, if there was no hydraulis, there is no Bach.
Exactly.
And Bach is a foundational composer of our era. Well, not our era, but you know what I mean.
So that leaves us with stay tuned for next week when we leap into and take our first step into AD.
Yes, you'll definitely want to stay tuned.
All right.